What's going on, everybody? It's FREEDO here for Your Overwatch. How have your placements been going? It feels like to me, there's a lot more players on now than were in the Roll Cube beta, but that also means there's a lot of players that aren't used to the current balance patch and the counters and interactions, and because of that, I've been winning a ton of games. Playing tank on my main account, which I haven't played on in forever, placed high and continued to climb a bit so that I've reached a new career high. And even things didn't go too poorly for my DPS account either. And I attribute a huge percentage of my success, not to skill, obviously, but just putting in the work to study the interactions of the meta. Of course, knowledge is power, and I wanted to share some of that with you guys in today's video, going over some of the strategies I've been using. And yes, because I know so many of you did ask for it, I will start streaming some gameplay to YouTube soon. Just have to work out some technical difficulties on it first, but should be able to get that up and running in a couple days. I've been talking a lot about tanks recently, but in today's video, I really wanted to focus on damage picks, because getting the right ones on your team, whether it's you playing it or if you're trying to get your teammate to make the right swap, I mean, that can be everything, especially with how brutal some of the interactions of the game are in modern day Overwatch. And the first example is one you should definitely consider, and I just don't see enough. Reaper is an incredible hero right now, and it seems like a lot of DPS players feel above playing him or something. Me, of course, an intellectual main tank player, have no problem playing mechanically easier heroes and getting basically free SR for doing so. The funny thing is, Reaper should be considered meta, but because he doesn't get picked as often as I think he should be, he's kind of a counter meta pick in ranked until everybody figures out that he pretty much just gives you free wins. In the Overwatch League, they've been playing him non-stop, and there's a few reasons for that. I think the biggest one, though, in ranked is that he's the only character in the game that really can go toe-to-toe with Doomfist. And I know many of you think, surely McCree can stun him and can poke him down at range and all sorts of things like that, but other answers to Doomfist are far less reliable. Reaper can match toe-to-toe with the durability in a brawl, and most importantly, has one of the best escapes in the game with Wraith Form. And my biggest tip for this interaction is to dodge his big engagements and control the right space so that you stand in an area that can't easily get knocked into a wall. Your footsie game against Doomfist, as well as actively dodging his big cooldowns when he commits into you, is everything. Because remember, the thing that makes Doomfist impossible to kill is him coming in and getting shields on your team. Well, if Reaper hits shift, gets a reload, and then is locked and ready with devastating shotguns at close range on Doom, you do a ton of damage to him, but also you deny him those crucial shields. That's my favorite way to play. I think just going at the enemy Doom makes so much space for your team, and if you don't do that, he very often can kill 3 players in his own right. Now, the other thing you could do is play Doomfist yourself, but that sounds a little bit difficult, so I advise playing the easier character, but of course both heroes are incredibly top of the meta, but Doom's just more popular, it feels like, whereas Reaper, despite his strength, isn't getting picked nearly as often as I think he should be. Some other things to keep in mind, of course, one of the reasons why Reaper's so top of the meta in the higher levels of play is because without him, the enemy could just play dive. But because Reaper was power crept to deal with goats, well, against just simple dive tanks now, he's insane against them. Way too good in my opinion. And as you guys know, I'm a big fan of playing dive against Orisa Sigma, but the thing that makes it so top of the meta at higher ranks in the pros is because they're also playing the best damage picks, but your enemies often aren't, so remember that. If the enemy doesn't have a Reaper, you most definitely can go dive, isolate squishies, and have a great time and ignore the tanks all day. But Reaper's massive consistent damage can just go toe-to-toe with anything, and does even more work against bigger bodies like tanks and Doomfist. And if the enemy's running the meta shield tank combination Orisa and Sigma, keep in mind, Reaper can flank as well. Read the cooldowns of your enemy and any stuns they might have or punishes on you, and you can teleport right in their team once they use some of those key abilities. We've been seeing this a lot in the Overwatch League as well, where just Alpha teleports right into the middle of everybody and been cleaning things up. In any case, if you find yourself getting dove too much by any character, or can't hit shots because there's too many shields in your way, be sure to go to Reaper, because he does everything this meta needs. And even if the enemy do pick counters, ranged characters like McCree, Widow, Hanzo, Pharah, there's a good chance that you do too much on the front line, destroying their tanks before they can even compete, especially if you have Moira healing you, outdoing their damage, while you heal yourself. It's just OP. Behold the power of power creep. Next up, I want to talk about Junkrat, and it's specifically his interaction with Symmetra. We did make an entire video on the strategies to counteract Symmetra, and an interesting thing about that is many players kind of had a forehead response to that video, like, counter Symmetra, that's easy, everyone knows how to do that. Meanwhile, despite me winning a huge percentage of my games recently, of the games I lost, a lot of them them were due to my team not knowing how to counter Symmetra, just jumping into her value and getting cooked down. Especially players that aren't used to the new Symmetra beam and maybe haven't played in the Role Queue beta or the PTR, they don't know how much you have to respect Sim. Tank players, you can't give her any charge ever. Putting your barrier near her dooms everyone to failure. You have to run away and yield any space she takes, even if it's on the objective. But on the other end of things, since so often Symmetra's getting played on attack to teleport onto points, Junkrat is just such a natural predator to this playstyle, because if you play aggro onto them and they want to set up a telly, well, a concussion mine can displace the entire setup, potentially get a kill if nothing else, get you a bunch of ult charge, but also random matchmaking teams aren't going to be as proficient at cleanly covering each other as they get into the teleporter. So if you don't make it, the enemy could be accidentally splitting themselves up really badly, allowing for you to divide and conquer. And Junkrat's just a hero that loves doing that. I think he's super underrated in this meta. I'm actually surprised the pros aren't even playing him, because he's good against Doomfist and Reaper as well, punishes the Symmetra teleport playstyle, and rivals the amount of spam damage she puts through. And on the other end of this coin, in sort of this DPS meta triangle that's been building, is Pharah, which I can't stress enough is just incredible right now. Remember, so many of these characters that are getting played, especially the tanks, are slow. And without a lot of Lucio as well, a concussive blast to put them out of position is team fight winning. And although her shield break isn't great, you should never really be shooting shields in this meta anyway. The reason why Doomfist is so great is because he gets value past the shields, and Pharah's no different. Separating enemies from shields with her boop to send enemies towards you is sort of the reverse of Doomfist punching them away. But both of them can be set up for big kills, and similar to Doomfist as well, Pharah combos with halts quite well also, whether into rockets, into concussive blast, into barrage. It's so important that you get your teammates to play one of these meta triangle heroes. And you'll notice that all of them have crowd control, which is so important to get any value past the barriers, because most other heroes in the game right now, unless they're set up with good ground already to have an angle or have a flank or a vantage point from somewhere, if they can't interact with displacing the barriers or flanking them or countering any of these heroes that will also be flanking your team, they're not going to be really doing much. You can afford to maybe have one damage dealer that doesn't add some of these big crowd control effects, but having two means more than likely you'll spend too much time shooting at shields, and I can't stress enough, shooting at barriers gives them value. It gives them purpose. Breaking barriers is a waste of time, unless for some reason you just have more barrier break than they have barriers, but when teams are running Orisa Sigma, it's just too many shields to block. For the last part of the video now, we're going to go through an epic game of Paris that I had and go through some of the counter-picking strategies and decisions that I and the team were trying to put through here. We attacked first, and our first attack went pretty well on A, but by the time we got to B, the Doomfist was being too much, and a teammate asked for me to pick Sombra. So I obliged him, and the strategy does eventually work, but it's how poorly it works that I think shows off why Sombra and characters like her, any sustained damage hero that doesn't have a huge burst potential like the other ones I mentioned, can kind of struggle right now. So I do work my way up towards an EMP, which sort of wins the first part of the fight, but of course in 2 CP you gotta win like 5 fights in order to capture B, and we scrap out sustain, keep ulting them, and keep going for hacks on some of their retake targets, and are going to work up our way to another EMP, cleaning things up. And it's how slow this whole process of playing Sombra was that makes her a really tricky pick. Could have I improved my play? Of course, we always can, but in the new mid-fight centric meta, where ult charge rates are 12% lower than they used to be last season, a lot of these heroes that sort of just have pressure damage in the mid-fight, building up to an ultimate, don't do as much as they used to because ults are just harder to come by nowadays. So instead on our defense, prepared for them to likely run Symmetra and other slow-moving team comps, I go to Junkrat on the defense, I farm up quite a bit of damage, and due to Junkrat's ability to play on corners while still being able to escape with mobility, Junkrat is an incredibly oppressive hero in this meta, and we're even working towards a full hold if the enemy team's Genji doesn't make a huge play on me, reflecting my damage back at me to take me out. We do make a last-ditch attempt to come back to the point, but our diva goes back to get a mega health pack instead of die on point to contest it. Highly suggest in those chaotic scenarios where you're not sure whose job it is to do what, say whether you can touch or who needs to touch if you know who they are, especially if you're in respawn. Hop on the comms and help the team figure out that type of situation, because that could have been another spot where we already won this game. But alas, we're going on to defend B for quite a few minutes. Enough time for the enemy to build up a Dragon Blade, but one of my favorite uses for Junkrat's Riptire is as a defensive ult. In chaotic ult fights, when the enemy's engaging in on you, oftentimes they're hunting down key targets and trading in the Riptire during that chaos, especially keeping in mind a lot of ultimates aren't really good at shooting a tire as it comes through, or can capitalize on enemies who are pressing W to try to follow up on an ultimate setup. Junk's tire still does the job in these crazy exchanges. The only unfortunate part is, because we had so long to defend, we make a mistake by over-peeking at main. When you're defending like this, remember to use cover and don't waste your shielding and tanking resources or take damage to your face by feeding the enemy Genji Dragon Blade just on poke, when on defense it's perfectly acceptable to hide around a corner. Really close interaction. I nearly get my Riptire in sync with the Nanoblade again, but don't quite have it in time. That's going to open up this defense and force us to both go into overtime. Crazy game of Paris isn't over yet. Now on the attack, I'm pretty happy with the comp our team rolls out running with here. Wrecking Ball does a wacky rollout engage over the top to start flanking, get things to chase him, make space on the front door for more flanks, and between the Wrecking Ball and the Pharah, we have multiple threats that can boop targets off the high ground. That's the real key part of this. Displacing the tanks away from the Bastion makes for easy cleanup on A, and going into point B, we have an ultimate advantage. After winning the first fight, the enemy swaps to Widow and Hanzo, so I have to treat them with a ton of respect. But here we're going to see another feels bad moment interacting on the objective. With the last few seconds on the board, I concussive blast to touch it, but I don't want to be standing on the point as Pharah, so I fly up in the sky. We successfully dive, clean up some kills, but we don't trigger overtime. The tanks don't touch the point, and I assume my earlier contest made them assume that I was going to trigger it, and I had to go back and check and Google how these interactions even work, because I forgot. Overtime only triggers if you touch the point within 3 seconds of the time running out. So when I dove onto point, I was here contesting at 3.6 seconds. Can you believe it? Half of a second off, and the overtime meter would have began, but because I mistimed it ever so slightly, I don't trigger the overtime meter, and we're not able to clean up that point, which that's 2 objectives now that we won the team fight, but weren't able to cap. Ah, good grief. Team doesn't want to get dove on the defense here, so we go for a Wrecking Ball. The rest of the team wasn't too happy about that pick because Orisa is just so stable standing on the high ground perch, and the thing I wish my team did to compensate for the fact that our main tank player wanted to play ball is just spread out on the defense. If you don't have an Orisa, don't stand in a position that requires an Orisa. Just spread out, crossfire, and play counter dive. Whereas instead, if you stand up in the open, things can go kind of poorly. Now the dive comes in, help get the elim on the Doomfist, start burning down the tanks, but our rotation was rushed, so we weren't able to punish the res. And I have to stress, it's overtime. It's the last point. They don't get a point until they capture all 3 ticks. You can give up 2 ticks to make sure you win the team fight. Nah, just rough objective control. This is the type of thing that is pretty common at this rank. Playing on my main account on DPS, I'm lower rated than my alt account DPS for some reason. So when you find yourself in these situations, a lot of times just communicating the proper objective management is the difference between winning and losing. And I think that's the easiest way to get out of Masters, which is just a horrific rank to play in. A lot of the players are skilled, but their game sense just isn't there. And I think that lesson goes on, I know, at ranks below it as well, where maybe both aren't very skilled and don't have game sense as well. But in any case, we do end up tying this game. Was quite a wacky one indeed, and going to be everything for today's video. I hope you did enjoy it and found it useful and maybe entertaining. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to leave it with a like. It really does help us out, lets us know that you're enjoying the content, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you actually get notified when our videos go live, and link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, Overwatch League predictions for the playoffs. I was 2-0 yesterday. Today's matches are harder. Let's see if I can get those right as well. To see all that and more, be sure to hit us a follow on Twitter. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.